Rembrandt van Rijn was born in 1606 in the bustling Dutch city of Leiden, where canals carved quiet paths through crowded streets and the air often smelled of ink, oil, and salty herring, making it the perfect place for a boy with a vivid imagination and a restless pencil. From a young age, he seemed far more interested in light bouncing off walls, shadows dancing across cobblestones, and the way old people's faces folded into stories than in memorizing long lists of dates or the proper way to conjugate Latin verbs. His father, a hardworking miller covered in flour more often than not, hoped Rembrandt would pursue law or something sensible and respectable, but Rembrandt found courtrooms dull and parchment uninspiring unless it could be sketched upon. He begged to study art, not because it looked fun or easy, but because he felt something powerful stir inside him every time he held a brush or watched candlelight glimmer on a jug of water like magic. He trained in workshops where the air was thick with turpentine and ambition, and though he learned quickly to mix colors and stretch canvas, what fascinated him most was how to make paint feel like thought, memory, or skin. While other students tried to impress with idealized beauty and classical poses, Rembrandt was more interested in warts, wrinkles, tangled beards, crooked teeth, and every tiny imperfection that made a person look unmistakably real. He sketched beggars, scholars, soldiers, and market ladies with equal fascination, seeing each as a walking story wrapped in fabric, bone, and experience, waiting patiently to be unwrapped with a brush. Rembrandt's obsession with faces was so intense that he painted dozens of self-portraits not out of vanity, but because he believed the best way to understand people was to study the only subject always available, his own ever-changing, increasingly wrinkly reflection. He painted himself as a young man with hopeful eyes, as a middle-aged man with tired shoulders, and as an old man full of questions, regrets, and maybe a few hidden jokes behind the wrinkles. By the time he was in his 20s, Rembrandt's paintings had begun to shimmer with something new and emotional weight, a sense of mystery and a glow that made viewers feel like they were stepping into the world inside the canvas. He understood that light could be soft or dramatic, warm or dangerous, and he used it the way a composer uses sound to build tension, direct attention, and whisper secrets between the brushstrokes. As his reputation grew, so did the line of people willing to sit for hours just to have their expressions captured by a man who could somehow make sorrow noble and silence feel deafening. His portraits were not just likenesses, they were soul mirrors, revealing the fears, doubts, strength, and quiet dignity hidden beneath velvet collars and polished buttons. Even wealthy merchants and judges, who usually wanted to look powerful and perfect, often left Rembrandt's studio looking a little too human, as if they'd just confessed something important without saying a word. Though his growing fame brought him fancy commissions, expensive clothes, and even a house with more rooms than he needed, Rembrandt never lost his curiosity about the darker corners of life or the hidden layers behind every smile. He painted scenes from the Bible, not as frozen perfection, but as living moments filled with raw emotion, grief that trembled in the hands, joy that spilled from the eyes, and doubt that pressed against the edges of faith. In the blinding of Samson, muscles strain, eyes scream, and every flick of red paint feels like a heartbeat in panic, making viewers lean back in their chairs just to breathe again. In The Return of the Prodigal Son, a father's hands cradle a kneeling son with such quiet forgiveness that even the harshest critic might suddenly need a handkerchief. Rembrandt loved drama, not the shouting kind, but the slow-burning kind that smolders behind silence and sneaks up on you when you least expect it. His etchings, drawn with tiny, careful lines on copper plates, captured the trembling moments between action and stillness with such tenderness that even simple scenes felt like whispers from history. Though he could paint kings and queens with impressive detail, he was just as likely to spend days on a study of a beggar's cloak or the tired hands of a working mother, believing that all stories deserved equal care. He painted his beloved wife Saskia again and again, not just because she was beautiful, but because he saw in her a world of expression, laughter, mischief, and gentle strength that no single portrait could ever fully contain. When Saskia died young, Rembrandt's grief poured onto his canvases in shadows and silence, as if he were trying to find her in every flicker of light and every curve of a painted cheek. Though sorrow followed him, Rembrandt never stopped painting, because for him, each brushstroke was not an escape but a search for meaning, memory, and the quiet truth behind each moment. As fashions changed and new painters rose with brighter colors and smoother styles, Rembrandt's rough textures and moody shadows began to look old-fashioned to wealthy patrons who preferred sparkle over soul. Commissions slowed, debts grew, and Rembrandt, once the toast of the town, found himself pawning furniture, selling drawings for coins, and painting in smaller rooms with simpler tools. Yet he never painted faster or lazier, because his heart had never been tied to price tags or popularity, but to the impossible quest of making the invisible visible through paint. He painted aging faces with more tenderness than ever before, letting time leave its footprints across the canvas without shame or disguise. Even in hard times, his studio was a quiet thunderstorm of creativity, where each canvas wrestled with light, darkness, humanity, and hope. Rembrandt taught his students not to chase trends or mimic perfection, but to look deeply, feel honestly, and trust that truth always leaves a mark, even if it's messy or misunderstood. As he painted his final self-portraits, his eyes looked out not with regret, but with a tired kind of wisdom. If he had spent a lifetime chasing light only to discover that some of it had always been inside him. Though his pockets were often empty, his paintings were full of love, sorrow, wonder, and the stubborn belief that ordinary people carry extraordinary stories in every wrinkle, scar, and sideways glance. He believed that every brushstroke had to mean something, even if no one else saw it, and that honesty, once painted, had a way of lasting longer than applause. Rembrandt's story proves that greatness isn't measured by riches or praise, but by how deeply an artist dares to see, and how bravely they share what they find. And while critics may come and go like passing shadows, the quiet light inside a Rembrandt painting still shines softly across centuries, reminding us that being real is sometimes the most powerful thing art can do. His journey, both joyful and difficult, didn't end with a parade or a fortune, but with a paintbrush in hand, a candle burning low, and a heart still full of questions and wonder. And if you lean in close to one of his paintings today, you might feel a little whisper that says, "Look again, there's more hiding in the shadows than you think." As Rembrandt stepped deeper into the later years of his life, time itself seemed to slow around him, not because the world grew quieter, but because each moment became heavier, fuller, and more demanding of honesty than ever before. His paintings no longer tried to impress fashionable crowds or chase applause, but instead leaned inward, focusing on truth, memory, and the weight of living that settles slowly onto every human face. Wrinkles became landscapes, shadows became conversations, and light transformed into something emotional rather than decorative, as if it were carrying stories instead of merely illuminating surfaces. Rembrandt painted old men whose eyes seemed to remember wars, losses, jokes, and regrets all at once, allowing viewers to feel that age was not weakness, but a collection of lived moments stacked carefully together. He painted women whose faces showed strength shaped by endurance rather than beauty shaped by symmetry, quietly reminding the world that resilience often lives where perfection does not. Even as his financial troubles worsened, with creditors knocking and possessions disappearing one by one, Rembrandt refused to smooth his brushwork or soften his truth to please anyone. He understood that art created only to survive financially often loses the courage needed to survive emotionally, and he chose the harder path without hesitation. His studio became smaller, colder, and quieter, yet his paintings grew larger in meaning, heavier with silence, and richer with understanding. Each canvas felt like a conversation between past and present, between who he had been and who he had become, layered thickly with paint and reflection. Rembrandt's self-portraits from these years no longer show ambition or youthful confidence, but instead reveal a man who has lost much and learned deeply, meeting the viewer's gaze without apology or fear. His eyes seem to ask questions rather than offer answers, as if inviting anyone who looks to consider their own choices, losses, and quiet hopes. Though society had largely moved on, preferring cleaner styles and brighter colors, Rembrandt continued painting as though truth itself depended on it. He painted biblical scenes once more, but now they felt closer to everyday life, filled with tired bodies, gentle gestures, and moments of forgiveness that felt earned rather than idealized. In these works, miracles did not shout, angels did not sparkle, and holiness arrived quietly through compassion, touch, and understanding. Rembrandt showed that faith, like art, could be found not only in glory, but in humility and patience. Students and young artists still visited him, drawn not by wealth or fame, but by the depth of his vision and the courage of his honesty. He taught them that mastery was not about smoothness or speed, but about learning how to truly see before daring to paint. Rembrandt believed that light mattered most when it revealed something meaningful, not when it simply made things bright. As illness and exhaustion crept closer, his movements slowed, but his insight sharpened, as if the world had stripped away distractions to leave only what mattered. He painted knowing his time was limited, yet he never rushed, understanding that some truths require patience even when time is short. In his final years, Rembrandt painted fewer works, but each one carried the weight of an entire lifetime of looking, feeling, losing, and understanding. He had outlived his fame, his fortune, and many of the people he loved, yet his commitment to art remained stubborn and unbroken. When Rembrandt died in 1669, there were no grand celebrations, no glittering ceremonies, and no cheering crowds to mark his passing. Instead, he left behind rooms filled with canvases that breathed quietly with humanity, emotion, and the kind of truth that grows stronger with time. Years passed, tastes changed, and slowly the world began to realize what it had once overlooked. Viewers started to understand that Rembrandt had not painted darkness, but depth, and that his shadows were not empty, but full of meaning. Museums filled with people standing silently before his works, feeling watched, understood, and gently challenged by faces painted centuries earlier. Artists learned from him that imperfection can carry more honesty than polish, and that bravery sometimes means refusing to simplify what is complex. Children, gazing at his paintings, sensed that these faces were alive, not because they were pretty, but because they felt real. Rembrandt's legacy grew not through loud declarations, but through quiet recognition and deep respect. He became a reminder that art does not need to shout to be powerful, and that truth often speaks most clearly in whispers. His life teaches that success is temporary, trends are fragile, but sincerity can last far beyond one lifetime. Rembrandt showed that light is most meaningful when it emerges from darkness rather than avoiding it. Every painter who studies shadow, every storyteller who values silence, and every dreamer who chooses honesty over applause carries a piece of his spirit forward. His paintings continue to invite viewers not just to look, but to feel, reflect, and recognize themselves in unfamiliar faces. And as long as people search for meaning behind appearances, Rembrandt's work will remain alive, breathing softly from canvas to soul. His journey reminds us that art is not about being liked, but about being true, that seeing deeply is an act of courage, that shadows, when understood, can teach us more than light alone ever could. And if we stand quietly before one of his paintings today, listening with patience rather than judgment, we may still hear his voice whispering gently through the darkness, asking us to look again, and then look deeper.